Good afternoon and welcome for our final session at this first E-Misiones Silicon Valley organized by the International Committee of the Chilean Construction Chamber. I'm Gabriela Villalobos and today I'm joined by Matias Gonzalez from Meet Latam. Matias, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. We're very excited for today's last presentation from the entire weekend and very excited to have Joel today.
Yeah, and we wanted to thank you all who have been joining us through Zoom and through YouTube in this E-Mission since Tuesday now. Yeah. Today we'll be talking about digital transformation with a great speaker, Joel Barbier from Cisco System, who is also launching a book about this subject in Spanish. So we encourage you to send us your questions, to enjoy this moment and to have the opportunity to talk directly to Joel about this matter, about digital transformation. So now it's the time to present our next speaker, our first guest today. Joel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Joel?
Shall I go ahead?
Please.
Yes.
Thank you. So just a word to introduce myself. I have a dual role at Cisco. Internally, over the last 10 years, I've been with Cisco about 20 years, but in the last 10, my roles have been very closely linked to the digital transformation of the company, working for the chief digital officer, and now actually working for an innovation organization in IT called Customer Zero. So I'm a practitioner of digital transformation. But over the last 5 years, I've been involved in a small think tank, a small research group that Cisco has established with a management school called IMD, based in Lausanne in Switzerland. And so I've been also a researcher about what's happening with disruption across industries and value chains. And so I'm going to be sharing some of the findings from our research. A few years ago, 6-7 years ago, our focus was not on digital disruption. In fact, a lot of the analysis that I was doing at the time was very focused on helping our customers understand where is the money in the digital economy. And we called this the Internet of Everything, showing large value at stake opportunities across industries. But increasingly, our customers started asking about disruption, and asking for Cisco's perspective. What's happening in the market? What are these new forms of competition? And how do you manage to keep up? And so this was the reason why Cisco undertook this partnership with IMD. So why IMD? It's a reasonably, it's one of the leading business schools. It's a top 15 or 20 MBA. But there's one area where they consistently rank number one in the world. That's executive education. Every year, about 10,000 senior executives go to IMD for a few days or a few weeks, and they have over 100,000 alumni, which gives us more reach to conduct research than we ever had before. In fact, before IMD, we had other partnerships with Stanford and MIT, but really IMD brought a practitioner's perspective to this partnership. So to address our customers' questions about disruption, we undertook an ambitious program of research. We surveyed over 1,000 business leaders. We dissected the model of over 100 startups, and later worked with digital transformation leaders and practitioners to understand what was happening. Industries and value chains. So what did we find? Essentially, so the 1,000 or so business leaders that we have been surveying regularly told us that they think between 3 and 4 market incumbents, leaders in their industry, are going to be displaced in the next 5 years. They're telling us this is happening faster and faster. On average, less than 36 months for disruption. When we talk about disruption, by the way, it's about market shifts, right? Non-traditional competitors entering a new market and taking market share very quickly. And the number that has changed the most is this last one. 5 years ago, when we started the research, about 1 in 3 of the organizations we talked to viewed digital transformation, digital disruption as a board level topic. Today, 9 out of 10 think disruption is an existential threat, a threat that puts them, their entire organization at risk overall. The majority of them don't know how to respond, and this is why we started this research, to help them understand what's happening. What we were also pursuing is an understanding of how is disruption impacting different industries. What is the relative impact of disruption across industries? What we're finding is that if what you offer, product, services, can be digitized, chances are you'll already in the eye of the storm. We used a term, we used a metaphor to describe this disruption, what was happening in the market, in a first book published about 5 years ago called Digital Vortex. If you were a press organization, newspaper, you were already in the middle of the vortex. Other industries that have high capital intensity, that require physical labor or a physical place to conduct business, or that have complex processes, sometimes a regulatory environment that protects them, they have been relatively less impacted by disruption. If you think of real estate and construction, in our latest research, that's one of the industries where we've seen less impact. But make no mistake about this, no industry is safe from disruption. We're seeing disruption at different phases, and even if it's early on, there is disruption coming to every industry. And of course, with COVID, in the context of COVID, this disruption is accelerating. Things that would have taken several years or maybe a decade to get adopted have to happen in a matter of week or month today. And Cisco, the company I work for, is no exception. In a matter of 10 days, we had to accommodate everybody working remotely, from about 20,000 people on an average week to now nearly 200,000 people working remotely. And this had to be done very, very quickly. So the urgency is increasing. So of course, when you think about disruption, you're probably thinking about technology. And of course, it's technology innovation, mobile, Internet of Things, virtualization, miniaturization, that is making a lot of these changes possible, that is enabling these new forms of competition. But what we're really finding is that technology is not something new. Companies have been competing with technology innovation as a context since the 19th century. What's really new in this market is business model innovation, new ways that companies find to create and deliver value to their customers and to capture, monetize that value. So that sounds abstract. So I would ask you to think, just a quick thought experiment. Why do people use Uber, right? And there's many reasons why people use Uber. It's cheaper than a traditional taxi in many situations. It's more convenient. And Uber was able to scale massively. Uber was present in 150 countries in less than 5 years, in a market where traditional taxi have been typically city-based companies. What we're finding in our research is that disruptors are so effective, they're causing market shift so quickly because they offer great value to their customers. And I realize Uber is a cliche, but Uber is a great template to understand how disruptors actually cause market shift, how they take market share so quickly. And so in our research, we investigated how do they create this value, and we found that the 100+ startups that we analyzed could explain their success through a set of 15 digitally enabled business models that each create these forms of value: cost value, some kind of economic benefit; experience value, a differentiated service or offer; and platform value, new ways to connect supply and demand and create what we call network effects. Platforms are really the new form of competition in this digital economy. Um, and when we talk about network effects, it's the fact that the more people, the more subscribers on a platform, the more valuable the platform is to every single subscriber. Think of the telephone network, for example. If there was only one telephone in the world, it would have no value. Two telephones, a little bit of value. Two people can call each other. If everyone has a phone, the value of the phone network is a function of the number of people on the telephone network. Every phone becomes more valuable if everyone has a phone. And so using Uber, right? Uber is typically cheaper than a traditional taxi. It uses price transparency. When you order an Uber, they give you a fairly narrow estimate of how much they are going to charge you, even if there is traffic, right? This is just an example of a digital business models that Uber uses to create cost value for their customers. Another thing, another observation here: if you are a traditional competitor, um, an incumbent organization in the traditional economy, chances are you're trying to be a one-stop shop for your customers. Uh, you're trying to capture the full value chain in your industry. This example is HSBC. We chose this example not because it's a great bank or a bad bank, but because it's a very large bank and it's a very typical bank. HSBC provides the whole gamut of financial services to their customers: banking, lending, investments, insurance, financial planning, money transfers. If you think of the fintechs in the financial services industry, they don't have the manpower, the capital to go after the full value chain in their industry. They're actually focused on a very specific niche where they can offer this great value to their customers. Right? So they focus in one area where they can create value. But in doing so, they're essentially unbundling the traditional bank. They're prying open the traditional integrated value chains and fragmenting them. Right? It's in banking. There's not one major competitor that represents a threat for the entire industry, like Netflix or in entertainment or Amazon in retail. But it's like death by a thousand cuts. More and more startups using different models in different segments of the industry. Venmo for payments, etc., etc. I also do not try to memorize all of these logos. Why? Because a lot of these disruptors, they will go away, right? In the next 5 years, chances are most of these logos, they will not even be known anymore. Um, but make no mistake, it's not because the disruptors are going away that the disruption stops. In fact, uh, even if the disruptors are being acquired or going out of business or consolidating, the disruption, the different practices that they brought into their industry, they're here to stay, right? So, will I ever go back and stand in the street trying to call a taxi? No. I want a ride hailing application with a push, where with the push of a button, I can actually get a car and have visibility to when it's coming, right? So it's not about the disruptors, it's about the disruption. So, what did we talk about so far? One, digital competition is intensifying, right? The renewal rate of leaders at the top of every industry has never been so fast. And two, we talked about the fact that it's not about technology, or it's not only about technology innovation. It's actually about technology innovation combined with business model innovation. And it's this business model innovation, new ways disruptors find to create and deliver value to their customers and monetize that value, that is causing these sudden market shifts. So the next question that we had in our research was, how do they do this, right? How do startups with a few dozen people create so much havoc in industries that typically have hundreds of thousands of engineers, very large established companies? And so we looked in many different directions, but the one thing that seems to set disruptors apart, the one thing that disruptors have that incumbent organizations must learn is agility, right? So agility is a combination of speed and flexibility. And so we spent several quarters studying what are the organizational factors that drive speed and agility. And we realized it's a set of three capabilities that have to work together in an integrated fashion. The first one we call hyper awareness. It's the ability to listen, sense, capture information at a scale that no traditional organization has. When we studied these 100 plus startups, we found that all of them typically capture way more information than their traditional competition, about their customers, of course, but also about their employees, about their operations, about the market around them. So the first of these organizational capabilities is hyper awareness, the ability to listen and capture information. The second one is, of course, to make sense of that information to support informed decisions. This seems to be obvious, right? Listen, decide, act. But in reality, most traditional organizations we've looked at, they typically tend to use intuition, right? Gut feel when they make decisions. The startups we've studied, they tend to be very scientific about how they make decisions. And that involves, of course, analytics, automation of the decision making, but also inclusion, the ability to listen to the expertise, regardless of rank, distance, geography, many of the biases that we typically have, and whether the expertise is in the ranks of the organization or outside. All of these startups we studied, they are able to process a lot of information and make decisions very quickly about the information. And then, of course, the last aspect, as you make informed decisions, is to execute faster than your competition. And that requires the ability to move and reallocate resources. Talent, of course, that's the first one, but also technology and processes faster than your competition. So this sounds like a fairly abstract model, but I want to give you a simple illustration of this, of a company that is doing great to build this digital business agility in their operations. It's Starbucks. So I'm sure you're familiar with Starbucks. Starbucks has been hugely successful over the past 20 years. They now have a presence across more than 20,000 stores. They've become a multi-billion-dollar company, but they're victims of their success. If you go to Starbucks in the morning or midday or late afternoon, chances are there's going to be a line of people waiting for their coffee. And that's Starbucks' challenge, because people either enter the line and they lose patience and leave, or when they drive by the Starbucks, they just see the line and they don't bother. They go elsewhere for their coffee. And so what Starbucks has been doing is they've been experimenting with mobile order and pay. So think of the digital business agility framework, the ability to capture information. Starbucks has an app. They know what my preferences are, right? I like a large tea with room for milk, and where I am. How far am I from the next Starbucks? Informed decision making. based on where I am, they can actually predict how long it's going to take me to get to the store, and fast execution. With the application, I can actually, just with the push of a button, order my regular drink. And in doing so, they're saving 30 seconds in the order taking process and another 30 seconds in the payment process. And so they are optimizing their existing footprint. They have the ability to push more people through the same stores. Before COVID, they were already reporting that this mobile order and pay represented between 20 and 30% of their total business. And with COVID, I'm sure this has become much larger. So here is an example of a company that built mobile order and pay to introduce great agility. This was, by the way, this is not me saying this, but if you listen to the leaders at Starbucks, they're really saying that the mobile app was the first step that started their digital transformation. I know this is not exactly your industry, but I'm hoping that you can use this as a parallel, as a metaphor to provoke thoughts about how to transform. So this is, I'm sorry about this. So this is the background of disruption, right? Digital competition is intensifying. It's about business model innovation as much as it is technology innovation, and the organizational capability that disruptors have and that incumbent organizations must learn is agility. And so 5 years forward, um, most organizations we talk to, most of the leaders we work with, have now this sense of urgency about digital transformation. However, most of them don't know how to drive this, right? They don't know how to address these challenges of digital transformation. And so this is the reason for us to publish this second book called Orchestrating Transformation. And this book is not about management theory. It's really a practitioner's perspective about how to transform. By the way, the book is becoming available in Spanish. We've just completed the Spanish translation with an editor in Madrid, and I'm sorry if I haven't been able to send copies of the book. We had some delays associated with budgeting here at Cisco, but I will send a case of book so that you can share with those who are interested. This book really is uh, um, learning the findings from our research from another 2-year ambitious program of research about how to respond to digital disruption. So what we found, most of the leaders that we talk to are reporting that they struggle with transformation. And this is actually no surprise based on the research that we've done, um, because the vast majority of the companies we have surveyed uh, report that they're not reaching the full value of their transformation. Um, in fact, 95% of them said that their digital transformation failed to meet the full expectation, the full return on investment that they were expecting. By the way, and by the way, change management is a topic where there is a lot of literature already. When we started um, our background research on this topic, we typed change management on Amazon. There's more than 80,000 books on the topic, and so we were not sure we could actually bring something new to the discussion. But we found that there's a few challenges that have not been addressed. The first one is that we tend to think of transformation as a one-time event. Generally, this painful multi-year process that companies must endure to emerge as a different company. And in the book, in Orchestrating Transformation, we say companies, they're not like caterpillars or butterflies, right? Digital transformation is about this perpetual task of leadership to improve the value companies create for their customers, improve the performance of the organization. It's not a one-time effort, it's an ongoing challenge. The second and most important thing is actually the fact that because of organizational complexity, companies try to simplify transformation. So why are organizations complex? The first one is scale, right? Very, very large organizations. If you think of ourselves, Cisco, we have 70,000 employees, and then another 400,000 people who are in our partner ecosystem who sell Cisco solutions. When you try to affect change in such a large ecosystem, it's mind-bogglingly complex. But also because of interdependencies, right? Companies are Organizations are very interdependent. And so if you try to affect change in one place, you're going to have unintended consequences in other areas. And things are very dynamic. Increasingly, it's becoming hard to plan to do the long-term planning that we used to do 20 years ago because technology evolves quickly, leadership changes, market expectations evolve. And so the environment is very, very dynamic. And so what we found is that in the face of this complexity, companies try to affect change one function at a time. But when they do this, they put that one function out of sync with the rest of the organization. They destroy the existing synergies, the fabric that people established within their organizations. They essentially create more negative impact than good. What we also found is that traditional approaches to change, they don't work. I don't know if you recognize this framework. This 8-step sequential process is the one recommended by one of the gurus of, change management, Professor Cotter at Harvard Business School, in a bestseller called Leading Change. Cotter says any change management process should follow these 8 steps. What we're finding in our research, people are telling us this doesn't work. So we asked, why? Why is that not working? And they told us, because of the very dynamic nature of the organizations, it takes quite a bit of time and effort to go through these steps, Cotter outlines. And we never get to step 8. When we've established a change, we want to institutionalize it, we never get to institutionalize the change. Technology has evolved, new leaders are in place, market expectations have changed, and we never get to institutionalize the change. And so we want to propose a different, more nuanced view of change, one that essentially adjusts for 2 factors: how much you want to transform and how complex is the transformation, right? What is the extent of my transformation? Am I trying to do something small and incremental, or am I trying to do something radical? Think of smart manufacturing, connected logistics, e-marketing. Those are very significant changes. And the second one is, what is the context of my transformation? Am I trying to affect change in one organization that reports to me, where I control all the resources? Or am I trying to affect change in a cross-functional organization, or even bigger, in an ecosystem beyond just my organization? And in this context, if you're trying to affect small incremental change in an organization where you're the boss, you control the resources, well, the traditional change management will probably work, even though it's a challenge, but will probably work. But if you are trying to affect radical change, right? Evolve your business model, the way you operate, your portfolio of offers, and you're trying to do this in a very cross-functional environment, then traditional change management doesn't work. So you might ask me, well, if it's so risky, why would I try to transform? Well, the answer is, it's the organizations that have taken on the most ambitious change programs that have really realized the most value. the risk increases, but the value, the size of the prize, increases with this transformation. Think of organizations like Intuit, Adobe, ABB. Those organizations have been very successful. And in the book, we look at dozens of those that have been very, very successful. And so, in this context, we need a different approach to change, one that we call orchestration. Why do we use a musical concept? Well, because in management, we tend to think in a very linear, sequential way, right? We'll do A, then B, then C. And what we're finding is that that's the reason why transformation efforts fail. By being sequential, one function at a time, we destroy existing synergies. And so we're using the metaphor of the symphony orchestra, and we defined to orchestrate as to mobilize all the resources across the organization and enable them with a sense of direction, budget, training, so as to create a desired effect. If you think of how you play a symphony, right? The way my school kids perform a symphony versus the London Symphony Orchestra, it's very, very different, right? The outcome is very different. Execution, the quality of execution really matters, right? And so very much like a symphony orchestra creates a beautiful symphony, organizations need to work together across the ranks of the organization, across the functions, to create a joint outcome, a desired effect. And so let's step backwards, right? What does this mean? Well, when you want to transform, you've got to work backwards from the strategic objectives of the organization. Two things to consider. One is, what is my value proposition? How much value can I create for my customers? Is it cost value, experience value, platform value, right? Back to the framework that make the startups successful. What is my value proposition? And the second one is, we don't have time to cover this framework here. It's a short presentation. I'd be happy to follow up. But in that context, am I going to play offense or defense? Am I going to go and disrupt an adjacent industry or defend my current position? Those form the guiding objectives of your transformation, like the sheet music of the orchestra. Once you have identified these guiding objectives, there will be things that, challenges that emerge, things that stand between you and the objectives of the transformation. How do I change my culture? How do I attract talent? How do I create a different experience for my customers? And so in this context, if you think of the organization as an org chart, right, the traditional functional silos, it's not very helpful. Because what you're going to have to do is actually execute across functions. What we found is that no organization is very good at the cross-functional things. Even Cisco or successful players typically struggle when it comes to executing across functions. And so in that context, we think a different view of the organization is necessary. We think you can think of any organization as a set of 8 instruments. Any organization can be represented as a set of 8 instruments, and those are not functions. Why? Because functions are siloed, they can potentially destroy existing synergies that exist in the organization. These instruments, they are operating imperatives for transformation. So these are, what do I offer? Through which channels? How do I engage my customers, my employees, but also my partners? How do I organize for this change? What structure, but also what is the culture? In other terms, what are the things that people read between the lines when they receive instructions? Sometimes they think, oh, it's the latest management trend, let's ignore it. In a year, it will go away, right? And how do I reward success? So this is another fairly abstract construct, this metaphor of the symphony orchestra for an organization, but it's abstract by design because we want to challenge the conventional ways people think about change. So let me bring this to life with a very practical example. This is an example of a Spanish bank that has had global expansion recently. And they've been one of the few very successful organizations to transform. When we approached BBVA, we worked with one of their leaders, their digital CIO. His name is Jose Olaya. And we asked Jose Olaya the one question that we got from everybody when we did this research, right? Where do you start? Where do you start your transformation? This was the question that we got from most people we worked with. And at the time, Jose Olaya paused and he said, well, you cannot really think like this. It does not work like this. And he really influenced the way we're thinking about this. The thing he told us was in the context of BBVA, we had to think of different places at the same time. So I'm going back to the orchestra for the example of this bank. He said, well, we realized at BBVA, we had to become a mobile bank. If the bank worked on the mobile, then the other channels would work as well. They would align, they would follow. And so how do I change my offerings to a mobile bank? But to create a mobile bank, I need to attract digital talent into my workforce to create these mobile applications. To attract this talent, I've got to change my culture from a traditional banking culture that punishes failure to one that rewards experimentation and risk-taking, right? So I had to change my culture, but I also have to change my incentives. We had to change our IT structure. IT was a separate silo, a separate hierarchy, and we had to change this and embed IT talent into small teams that would work with other areas of expertise: retail banking, data science, project management, to make all of this happen. And so here's an example of an orchestration, how this bank made multiple organizations work in concert towards the digital transformation of the organization. And now if you look at BBVA, they started this 20 years ago, but if you look at BBVA today, they've attracted people who bank on a mobile. And even though these people, they do a lot of transactions, they're typically low touch because a lot of this is automated. And so, and the other thing is these people, they are increasing their engagement with the bank faster than the market. And so BBVA is growing faster than the traditional banking industry. And at the same time, their cost expense ratio is improving. They have less costs than the average bank. And as a result, they've had impressive financial results. So here again, an example of orchestration at scale. Okay, we have a limited time, so we don't have time to cover all of the practical aspects of orchestration. But I want to insist on one thing. In the book, in the later chapters of the book, we look at this from a practical perspective, right? Orchestration is hard, but the capabilities, the competencies that companies build to create orchestration are things that are very practical and that any organization is probably already doing. To mobilize their resources, things like customer journey mapping or business model design, business architecture, capability assessment are very important. And then to enable the connections in the organization, things like incubation, communication, and training are essential. And so we've identified a set of best practices that most organizations that succeed have. I'll give you just one example, and we don't have time to go through this in full detail, but I talked about customer journey mapping, right? Understanding every touch point I have with my customers. Nespresso is a great example of this. Nespresso is a very successful organization. They're one of the one of the larger revenue and profit drivers for Nestle, one of the largest companies in the world for consumer goods. When they launched Nespresso, Nestle had a challenge. Well, actually, not when they launched Nespresso. When they took Nespresso to new online channels, Nestle had a challenge. Why? Because the people who were successful at Nespresso were people who came from the trade. They were store managers that had been successful in selling machines and coffee capsules. And they were very skeptical of the online channel. Why? Because the average online order was smaller than the average order in the store. And so a lot of the traditional leadership at Nespresso tried to shut down the digital transformation. And so it took Cyril Lamblard, the person who led the digital transformation and the e-commerce line of business, a lot of efforts to do this. The first thing they did was work to change the mindset of the leaders. They started collecting a lot of information across every touch point from customers. And they were able to prove to the store managers that even though online orders were smaller orders on average, the people who ordered online also ordered in the store, and overall they represented a much larger revenue opportunity for Nespresso than the traditional customers, right? So their customer lifetime value was actually bigger for the company. They also changed the incentives. Instead of paying the store managers on just the point of sale, they started paying people based on zip code sales, right? They started paying based on the area of a store, both for online orders and for store orders. But in doing so, they really changed the objectives of the stores from a point of sale trying to maximize revenue to one where you can actually provide an experience. You're going to help the customers adopt the mobile application. Customers will come in to try new flavors of coffees and new forms of hot drinks. They're also very, very good at capturing information across every touch point that they have, from the purchases of the machines to the support calls to the reordering. They capture thousands of touch points every week with satisfaction reports, online issues, etc. And they summarize them into a succinct report that everyone in the management at Nestle receives every week. And so they've made everybody in the leadership across all functions aware of the challenges of the customers. And with this in mind, they're doing one thing. They've realized that instead of trying to design a beautiful, elegant user interface, it's actually better to have no interface than a beautiful interface, right? The idea is, instead of providing a beautiful app for you to order your coffee, what if, even if it's one touch, what if it's zero touch reordering? What if you remove actually any form of friction for customers? What if you can actually start a subscription where you're sending people coffee and you don't have to reorder every time? Essentially taking a lot of the frictions out of the process, right? So for a company like Nespresso, customer journey mapping, this in-depth understanding of every touch point with customers, has been one of the competencies that has been driving the digital transformation, a successful digital transformation. There's many more. We don't have time to cover all this. I'm going to wrap up here and open for questions. But essentially, if I summarize two books in this just one slide, right? If you think of the two imperatives for digital transformation, the first one, the enabling set of organizational capabilities for change, is agility, right? And so we've covered what it means to build agility in an organization. And if there's one thing that predicts success in digital transformation, it's synergy. It's the ability to build on the existing connections and fabric that exists within an organization. Okay, I'm going to pause here. Any, I see that there are some questions on online. Um, um, one more thing before I wrap. The book is written from a practitioner's perspective, right? We provide a practitioner's approach. So the book is the last part of the book is actually contains a lot of practical tools that you can use to apply to your organization. And by the way, if you have questions, I would be happy to have a more detailed follow up on this. But we provide a whole tool set that you can use to assess uh, your transformation imperative and the steps you need to take to mobilize and enable the transformation in your organization.
Thank you for that, Joe. Thank you for your presentation, for the tool set that you just explained. And we already have some questions. One of them is from Francisca Cruz, who was supposed to join us here today. Francisca from Echeverria Izquierdo. She had a small incident. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here. But she sent us a question for you, Joe. So software platforms allow the integration and interoperability of systems that historically could not communicate with each other. What opportunities can we find today in a construction site, both in the execution stage and in real estate development, and finally in the operation of these buildings?
I've seen a couple so I'm not a major expert in construction, but there's a few things that I've seen in some of the companies we've worked with that I thought were very interesting. The first one is if you think of a digital twin, right? This is a big thing in manufacturing, where you create a digital twin to emulate everything that's happening in the physical world in a software model, and you integrate all of these steps. Well, I've seen some of the companies in construction starting to do something like that. Essentially, if you build a digital truce, a digital blueprint for your construction, there's a number of things that you can change in terms of how you operate. In a traditional construction, things are basically sent to the construction site, and then they're assembled and processed through. And so there's quite a bit of time spent in actually providing, purchasing, bringing resources onto the construction site, and then putting them together on the construction site. If you have a digital truce, you can actually optimize some of that. You can actually start designing and building some of the components offsite and bring them in. You can also follow the purchasing and be able to estimate what quantities you need, etc., in a much faster and more efficient way. So essentially building a digital truce, which is essentially a software model of what you're going to do, and helping that and using that to decide what do you assemble offsite, what do you actually do on site, can be one way to optimize the operating model. Another one that I've seen is actually a supply platform. This is a company that I've seen in France. It's one of the emerging startups based in France, and it's actually one that essentially orchestrates the supply of both new and secondhand materials. So a number of construction sites don't fully use what they have, and so they end up with inventory that can be recycled. And so this platform allows the whole construction ecosystem to put things in common and actually trade, reduce a lot of the friction that is involved in trading some of the surplus materials and components. And so I thought these are two good examples of one, how do you change the operating model using, it's not called a digital twin. The company I've seen doing it call it a digital truce, which is essentially an integrated blueprint of the construction that can bring in all of the references. And the other one is a platform model, to orchestrate the supply of components. Does this help?
For that.
Thank you.
Yeah, also, Joel, another question here. I don't want to go directly to the book, right? So just we give enough time for everyone to review it, and then we can just make another like a conversation with you. But primarily, like with the COVID situation and everything that's going on, like you spoke about the digital vortex, right? How does that change with the situation that we're having right now? I know that the book and that study was maybe 2 years ago, more or less, right? Like, how have you seen? Because we have seen that construction was like one of the latest ones that are being disrupted. Maybe it has moved a little bit of shift, or it's still like kind of like the same.
Yeah, the with COVID, we're seeing an incredible acceleration. Things that we had predicted would happen over the next 10 years have to happen in a few weeks. And so incredible acceleration of the transformation imperative. Even if think of even small restaurants a few months ago, they only had a traditional model. Today, they can only survive if they can enable online ordering. And the successful ones in this area are the restaurants that have implemented a zero-touch interaction. I can book my table, order at my table, pay with my smartphone without having to interact with the waiter. And so, and think of what we're doing at Cisco in Q3, in our fiscal Q3, ended just a few months ago. We were not sure that we could actually close our books, close our financial quarter without any physical interaction, because a lot of the things that we're doing, they're already online and they've been online for 20 years. But there's still a number of meetings with shareholders, etc., that are happening in person, some signatures that were happening on paper. And so even a few months ago, we were not sure that we could complete the financial close completely digitally. And we had to change that, right? We had to go to 100% digital in a matter of weeks. If you think of customer behavior, visiting houses is much more complicated. So if I think of 6 months ago, one of my friends was building, he had a startup when he was building a 3D model to visit new houses. At the time, it seemed a little bit gadgety. I mean, it wasn't obvious that this was something needed for the market. Nowadays, scheduling a visit for a new house, that's become pretty complicated. Well, it depends, right? In the US, it's state by state, but where I live, it's pretty complicated. And so these 3D applications that allow you to visit something, get a good sense of what the house looks like before you actually see it, that would be another thing that is being adopted a lot faster than before. Sorry, long answer. COVID is hyper accelerating digital transformation.
Thank you, Joel. And we have another question from Jose Carlos Oyarzun. He would like your advice on a certain tool that you could suggest on how to identify a value proposal inside an organization.
Yes, I'm going to actually go back to the one of the key constructs in this presentation, with this, right? These three forms of value we talked about: cost value, experience value, platform value, right? And what we found for a lot of the disruptors is they don't just use one of these business models, like price transparency, or the very successful one. They combine a number of these different business models to create these forms of value. So you can use this as a framework to actually look at the value proposition and see, right, so reduced friction. What am I doing to reduce the friction that my customers experience? You can combine this with customer journey mapping. With the technology, I can actually reconsider a number of things. There is moments of truth in my customer relationship where the human interaction is still very important. Um, but there's other times when the process may be tedious and unnecessarily complex. And so, what is it that I can do where the technology can actually mask the complexity? Where can I simplify the interaction and remove all of the friction for my customers, right? So, this is just one example of how to apply these innovative business models to create value for customers. Does this help?
There's another question from the audience here, and it's based on two different things, right? Right. One is the importance on how do you see the importance of managing people in a focused on the innovation level? Specifically, how can you do that in the individual level? And the second one is what type of tools or roles would you suggest in order to manage and push these synergies that you spoke that are very relevant in terms of the digital transformation?
Yes, yes. So, um, I mean, it's interesting, the organizational and the human aspect. One of the things that we say in the book is we're not suggesting that organizations should blow up the organization, right? There is a reason why there is functional silos and hierarchical ones, because people who do like things need to be managed together, right? If you think of supply chain at Cisco, we have a model supply chain, and Gartner always puts us in the top right quadrant as one of the best practices in the world. So it makes sense for people in supply chain to be in one functional hierarchical organization, and so that should stay. But it's about working more horizontally across across functions. And so I can jump ahead to some of the things that we're doing at Cisco at the individual level. Um, Companies can provide a much better workforce experience, and providing an ideal workforce experience. It's not just about digital, right? It's not just about giving people technology. It's about how you combine the organizational aspects, the cultural aspects, with the physical aspects and the digital aspects, and and how you combine these three to create new ways to work. Um, I don't have time to cover the the full experience journey, but at Cisco, the way we work has changed very significantly over the past 20 years. When I joined Cisco 20 years ago, most people were in cubes, right? And the way your manager, one of the ways your manager measured your performance was if you were there between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., right? Physical presence was a big deal. And if you disappeared in the middle of the day, it was maybe not good, right? And we've tried different things, but today we need a very, very different workforce experience, one that provides flexibility. So right now, I'm not in the office. I'm actually at home. Um, some of my team is located in India, and I don't want to have to go to the office to interact with India when it's 9 or 10 p.m. Here. I want that flexibility. Also, how do we allow people to dynamically team up across functions? Because effectively, today I'm in IT, but a lot of the interactions that I have, they're not in IT. I interact with sales, I interact with engineering upstream. Um, how do we allow people to work effectively horizontally, laterally across functions? And so we've put in place new ways to measure performance, new ways to design the workplace with a portfolio of different capabilities, and new ways to collaborate that allow people to be engaged and collaborating effectively, regardless of where they are, when they decide to work, what device they tend to use. But it doesn't work if you just provide the technology. You have to drive this adoption. It's got to be sponsored from the top. People have to realize that it's better to work that way. And so there's a lot of communication, training, change management, and upskilling that needs to happen for the orchestra to work. Right, all of these things have to come together. I know this is not an easy one, but now when it comes to the bigger picture, the organization, I believe chapter 6 in the book is titled Organizing for Orchestration. And I don't have the pictures here in this presentation. I will add those before I send the presentation. But in terms of the organization for orchestration, we find that adding one more silo is often not working. Now, there is not one size fits all, right? There's not one recipe. It would be very nice if we had one recipe for all transformations. Um, all we're doing is finding practical best and next practices. But it's much better to embed the transformation as a network inside the organization. And so you don't create a whole new hierarchy, a new empire in the organization, because if you do, our experience is, in most cases, the antibodies come out, right? You create a new function that's going to try and drive transformation of the others. People resist change. And very quickly, it's a challenge. It's much better if the people in charge of transformation are actually leaders of fairly small teams that actually work across the board with a network of ambassadors. And if people involved in the transformation, actually the emerging leaders across each of those functions. The other thing is very often people tell us, oh, this is the new form of the PMO, right? You created a program management office. Program management is important, but that's not all, right? The people who are building the transformation, they should actually deliver tangible things. And these competencies are part of the things that they should bring in the organization. So it's not just program management, they're not just coordinators. In fact, just being a coordinator is usually can be counterproductive because companies get slower. It's about building these capabilities, right? So customer journey mapping, the people leading the transformation, they should have that skill set. Business model design, and this is not a competency that's easily found, right? To create business model design, you need some background in finance. You need to quantify value. You need to understand how you could redesign the way value is created for customers, how you're going to monetize that. And more organizations fail in this than organizations succeed. But the ones who succeed, I mean, Nespresso in business model design, we have examples with BASF, chemical company out of Germany. This is what they should be doing. Another one that I would highlight is capability assessment. When the beginning of the book talks about Mrs. Anderson, who is one of the line of business leaders at Technip. Technip is an oil and gas company, oil and gas services company, and she was the leader of the Scandinavian countries. And because Technip started losing deals against more digitally savvy competitors, they appointed her as chief digital officer, and she had no idea what to do. And Kristen Anderson was afraid that in her role as chief digital officer, she would become the queen of PowerPoint, basically irrelevant. So one of the first things she did was a very broad capability assessment. And what she realized was there was already dozens or hundreds of digital capabilities across the lines of business at Technip. And she realized that her role would not be about building a new empire, but actually bringing together, aligning the digital initiatives that already existed across the organization, right? And so that's why we insist on not doing constant org changes, right? One of the people we interviewed in the book says, we do an org change when we don't know what to do. It's about enabling the mobilizing and enabling the resources across the existing organization, connecting them a lot better so that they work together towards a joint outcome, more than it is about trying to do a reshuffle. Typically, reorgs can actually be costly because they can cost companies in terms of speed of and agility, right? The time for people to figure it out, you lose a quarter or 2 quarters or a year. Acquisitions can be the same sometimes, right? With the wrong challenges. Other questions?
We do have another question from Juan Ladrop. Juan?
Yes, gracias, Gabriela. Thanks so much, Joel, for your clear and motivating presentation. I have to say your English is just perfect to listen. I was thinking, what do you think is the role for associations like us, like this chamber for supporting digital transformation, like especially for smaller companies? And in that same way, what do you think is the potential of the synergy between these companies, these small companies?
Well, I'm thinking that's a hard question, by the way. And it's hard for me as an outsider to give you who have, years or decades of experience in your industry to give any advice. I've been a consultant before, and so I know it's, but maybe I would think of where you can actually help the organizations build these orchestration competencies, right? What would be needed? A lot of the new challenges associated with digital transformation has to do with software capabilities. What we're seeing across the world is a massive upskilling challenge. A company like Amazon recently published that they would have to upskill 100,000 people in their organization so that they could actually work in different ways, right? So how do you help the ecosystem evolve and provide a better skill set? That's one of the things that I'm thinking, right? In our industry, a digital skill set is the number one bottleneck to our growth, right? We can't find enough security people. We can't find enough data science people. So how do you do this at the industry level? The other one I was thinking was, how do you actually help the industry work more like an ecosystem, right? Where could platform models emerge to actually bring a different way of creating value together, right? Is there ways where you could better connect supply and demand and allow everyone to add value in an industry ecosystem, right? That's a broad, very open idea. Platform models are actually very hard to design. They're often very counterintuitive. But if you think of the successful ones, they're not making money through the main service that they provide. They're typically making money in a two-sided business model or multi-sided business model. Facebook gives you everything for free, and then they turn around and they use your information to monetize with advertisers, right? That's their number one source of revenue. So if you design an ecosystem, how is it going to work? Where does everybody contribute value, and how do you create more value for everybody? So, right, upskilling, bringing more skill set, creating a platform to allow the ecosystem to connect better. I think understanding what capabilities, doing this initial capability assessment, what capabilities exist in the ecosystem, what are the gaps, how could existing capabilities be better used, what are things that you could provide as shared resources to accelerate the change. I mean, in many cases, it can be very, very expensive if an individual company is trying to build a capability. But if you cooperate around it, it can be a more open source and an accessible approach. Those are three ideas. I could go on and on, but these are the first ones that come to mind. Is this a good answer? Does this align with your thinking?
Thank Thank you so much for that, Joel. And we're running out of time. We know you have to run now. Unfortunately, we had a lot of other questions, but this is a good sign, and it's a sign that it was a really great presentation. So thank you for your time, and we're eager to read your book.
Thank you. So I apologize that you don't already have the books. As I said, we're in the middle of a budget restriction, so I've hit a few glitches. But I'm going to try and send at least a couple dozen books to Victor. If you would like to follow up, I'm happy to be available for follow-up sessions where we've just scratched the surface. But thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel. Have a nice evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Hasta luego. Bye.
Hasta luego.
Hasta luego. Good.
Y con eso ya podemos cambiar al castellano porque estamos terminando esta primera semana, la primera sesión, la primera jornada en realidad de esta primera E-Misión organizada por la Comisión Internacional de la Cámara Chilena de la Construcción. Han sido 4 días.
Seminar organized by the Chamber of Construction. These have been very inspiring 4 days. I take the session from yesterday from the founder of Hotmail, talking about how we need to build balance between the family and business. That was a great counterpoint with the great former speakers that we had. I hope that this was helpful for all of our speakers, for all of our participants.